about this latest development with the stimulus checks, but for a moment, Frank Figliuzzi. Frank, of course, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence. He's now an MSNBC National Security Analyst. And Frank, I know you've been listening to this hearing nonstop. What has stood out to you most so far, especially with regards to the timeline for deploying the National Guard?
Yeah, Craig, we're finally getting some of the really difficult questions answered, which is that we are hearing word of multiple failures in bureaucratic decision making. And I'd put them into two different buckets: a pre-insurrection bucket and a post-insurrection, or while the insurrection is occurring bucket. We're hearing disturbing testimony from General Walker, head of the DC National Guard, that even in the days prior to the insurrection, he was in discussions with former Chief of Capitol Police Sund, and they discussed, hey, you're going to need me. You ready for us? Are you ready for this? Sund says he can't even feel comfortable talking about deploying the National Guard. He can't have that conversation. And then, as the insurrection is occurring, we're hearing word that senior Pentagon officials, including the Secretary of Defense, are saying, no, we're not going to deploy the Guard. No, I'm not going to approve a quick reaction force. And then once it's realized that everybody needs the National Guard's help, it's 3 hours later before final approval is given. General Walker, in charge of the DC National Guard, is essentially livid at the way he was treated and the way decision making was made. And he has conceded that if this was done correctly, they would have been there. Things would have been different.
Committees now have access, Frank, to the FBI report that was sent to the Capitol ahead of the attack on January 6th. We just heard from the FBI's counterterrorism assistant director there that anti-government, as well as racially motivated extremist threats, present the greatest domestic terrorist threat during the remainder of 2021 into 2022. How does intelligence sharing need to change moving forward, Frank?
The first thing that needs to happen is a mindset change. We need to start looking at ourselves and being able to see ourselves, people who look like us, as a threat. I think that was a major factor in not seeing what was right in front of them in terms of threat. This was not an intelligence failure. The intel was there. It was a failure to act on and see the threat that was staring them in the face. So we need a renewed emphasis on domestic terrorism, and I'm pleased that the head of counterterrorism for the FBI has called it what it is. As Director Wray did yesterday, this was domestic terrorism. These people were not patriots. They were doing an un-American thing. They were doing a terrorist thing.
You were on a network last week, Frank, after the first Senate hearing, and among other things, you said that senators were not asking the right questions. What do you make of the line of questioning that we've heard so far today? What are the key questions that you think still need to be asked?
Here's what I like about what we're hearing today. This is a kind of typical investigative approach. Start with lower level people, keep moving your way up and getting some truth. We're getting to the truth now as we work our way up on the Pentagon side. This is falling squarely on the Pentagon in terms of a failure to prepare. And here's the next hard questions that we need to get to at the next level of hearing. So was this merely typical Pentagon bureaucratic snafu that it takes hours and days to get something figured out? Maybe. Or is this evidence that there was political intervention, that the hand of the White House was involved in this? We're hearing word of optics playing into what this looked like if the Guard deployed. My gut's telling me there's more to this story. When you get the Secretary of Defense saying, no, 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 I'm needing to ask the question, did the White House reach into this decision making?
Frank Figliuzzi, stand by for a moment. We've got some breaking news right now.
Listen to this.
We are learning that the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI sent a joint intelligence bulletin to state and local law enforcement about the threat of another attack on the Capitol. This threat, as early as tomorrow, NBC.
A threat of another threat has now went out of a possibility here in the USA. The continental United States of America is under attack. And I have been trying to tell people that ever since that I have been putting out stuff on my social media platform. That Satan, which I know a lot of people think that Satan is some sort of fictitious fairy tale, like the Tooth Fairy, or some other fictitious fairy tale like the Easter bunny or something like that. Satan is real. Satan is now unifying his defenses, and he is out to destroy the American land. And it ain't just coming from across the pond, but this is coming from within our own party, from within our own government. So if you listen to this particular announcement that they're fixing to make, it really makes a lot of sense from the Bible perspective that in the last days, Satan will rise up because he knoweth his time is short. It talks about this in Revelations, that Satan will come into existence on the planet in great wrath, in great misery, in great remorse, towards trying to vindicate himself, because he knows that the time clock is ticking, and it's not ticking in his favor, but it's ticking against his favor. He knows this. He's a very intellectual entity. Satan is. And because of it, he is firing back and rising up in any possible way imaginable. So listen to this particular last warning that is coming out from Homeland Security and, yes, the FBI.
Julia Ainsley just broke the story a few moments ago. Julia, what more can you tell us about this warning and what's behind it?
That's right, Craig. So March 4th is a date that has been bantered around on some of these message boards used by some of the same groups involved in the January 6th attack. They have pinned that date because that was the going decades back, old inauguration day. And there is a conspiracy theory that somehow President Trump would come back and be inaugurated on that day. Now we can report, this is according to a senior law enforcement official who described this.
See what I'm talking about, it being crazy? It's not just no longer crazy. It's not just weird type crazy. Now it's dangerously weird type crazy. It's getting weirder. Especially whenever you see what occurred, Saturday down in Florida.
Joint intelligence bulletin to NBC News that they are warning that these groups have discussed plans to take control of the U.S. Capitol and remove Democratic lawmakers on or about the 4th of March. That would be Thursday. That's just tomorrow. And so they are now looking at these groups. But overall, what has really been emphasized is that since January 6th, the threat has heightened. These message boards have talked about this date, but there have been other dates discussed. But I think that what we're seeing now is some more, preemptiveness from the intelligence community, from DHS, to try to engage with state and local law enforcement partners. We saw a similar bulletin come out when the Biden administration took office. There are a few more details I just want to share from this that we're learning, Craig. They're calling these groups militia violent extremists, and they say that they may, quote, exploit public gatherings, either formally organized or spontaneous, to engage in violence. And they say that this violence can sometimes just start spontaneously, and that these groups are motivated by a perception of election fraud and other conspiracy theories associated with the presidential transition, which may contribute to domestic violent extremists mobilizing to violence with little or no warning. So we're just learning that right now, Craig. Apparently this bulletin was sent out to state and local law enforcement officials from DHS and FBI late last night.
They want to do January 6th all over again, it would seem, according to this reporting. They want to redo.
Well, I think that's what we need to be careful about. I'm just sort of sticking to this bulletin that there have been, there's been talk about March 4th. They are warning that this could happen. But as we saw even from testimony last week, that there has also been talks about attacks on the Capitol when President Biden would give his first inauguration. There are a number of dates sometimes that will come up and nothing will happen. But I think right now what we're seeing is a very preemptive warning, and we can see why, because of January 6th and because of the details we're learning now about who wasn't ready for that attack, and so they want to spread this warning. But I just want to be careful and to really show what this bulletin is saying, rather than I don't want to spread fear.
Sure.
Apart from that, but there's certainly a lot of people eyeing tomorrow and sending out warnings to try to get law enforcement involved as early as possible.
Frank Figliuzzi is still with me. Frank, just your initial reaction to what we just heard there from Julia, her new reporting.
A couple thoughts. First, sadly, it's further evidence and corroboration that we still have a radicalized segment of our population that is believing a lie, that is tying into everything from sovereign citizen ideology, that this notion that somehow Trump is the 19th president or should become the 19th president on March 4th, mixed with QAnon, mixed with violent militia. People are being duped by fabricated falsehoods. Secondly, I think the FBI and DHS have learned their lesson from January 6th, and they're going to push out intel to everybody so that they aren't taking the heat for not sharing the intel. So there's no excuse here. But March 4th is just another date on a calendar that simply indicates that we are developing a radicalized population that's not going away simply because President Trump is out of office.
It is beyond scary on so many levels. Frank Figliuzzi, thank you. Julia Ainsley, thank you as well for that breaking news reporting.
And this is what happens. What I was talking about a while ago, pertaining to dereliction of duty, I've only used this as an example towards what has personally went on in my particular life. David, my younger brother, in my particular life, whenever we moved back here, or whenever I moved back here in 2014, and we kept being agitated and aggravated and tormented by various people throughout the community. We even hired attorneys, went before the court systems in trying to get it to stop. And it never stopped. It may have been hushed down or eliminated a little bit, quieted down a little bit, but it never truly stopped. Why? Because the judge did not make an example out of certain individuals towards allowing for it to fester and get this far out of hand. It's the same way whenever various law enforcement agencies, as well as Congress and the Senate, sat back and allowed for Donald Trump to spew out his poisonous rhetoric. And it wasn't necessarily all the time in what he was saying, but how he was saying it. Like, I can kill somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. Like, Hillary Clinton needs to go to jail. Well, I'd take him behind a building and do the you-know-what to him. Using this type of strategy has built this type of resistance that now law enforcement, FBI, Homeland Security has to put out warnings to the American people towards warning them and letting them know that, hey, something could be coming up tomorrow because they have chosen this particular date because of this particular reason. These are all distractions, folks. These are distractions in regards towards what we should be doing right now pertaining to the COVID problem. We have lives to save. We have other activities to be looking at towards what's going on across the pond overseas rather than generate our own problems right here in America. But once more, whenever you're talking about a cancer from within that, yes, Donald Trump helped to create, whenever you're talking about this type of cancer from within, you're talking about something that goes beyond the seriousness of just worrying about the Taliban or the jihad or other types of radical movements across the seas, across the pond. You're talking about a radical movement that's right here, among us, with us. It's sad. It's really, really sad in where we have been positioned in history towards looking at all these dangers now that are coming at us left and right.
We have some more breaking news on the coronavirus relief negotiations that are happening on the Hill. New details about who could get stimulus checks and who will likely not be getting those checks and how large they'll be. All of it looks like it could be.
Let's move forward because this is interesting. And let's freeze it right there.
Those $1,400 relief checks that are part of the COVID relief package, that change comes as the Senate is set to take the first steps this afternoon toward passing the $1.9 trillion package. NBC's Garrett Haight back with us from Capitol Hill. And Garrett, again, more breaking news there on the Hill. Why have they decided to implement these new income thresholds? And most importantly, what's it going to mean for Americans who so desperately need those checks?
Craig, this was a request from moderate Democratic senators. Republicans have uniformly opposed this bill. They're going to continue to oppose it, likely even with this change here. What this says is the caps for how much money you can make and still be eligible for what would be a $1,400 check has now been lowered. So if we can put up on the screen, we put together a graphic here. Basically, if you're an individual and you make up to $75,000 a year, you're still eligible for that whole $1,400 check. But unlike in the House version of the bill, where that number started to phase out, it started to step down between 75 and 100,000. That step down now ends at 80,000. You hit that $80,000 cap, no check for you. Likewise, for people, married people filing jointly, heads of households, the numbers are a little bit different. But what you see here is this long kind of phase out period up to a higher income level has been shortened. I don't yet know if this is going to change the overall price tag of this bill. We'll probably find that out when the CBO releases its report later. But this is, again, moderate Democrats who wanted to more narrowly target the money that they were sending out to the folks who they believe need it the most. Also, the same sources tell us that unemployment provisions of the bill, which had been in discussion to be changed, those expanded unemployment provisions are going to stay the same at that extra $400 per week, Craig.
Were those moderate Democrats, Garrett, were they threatening to oppose the president's bill over this?
No, I mean, I don't think you could call it a threat to oppose here. But again, you have two different constituencies here. A House, which has generally more liberal members, and a Senate Democratic caucus with 50 members, some of whom more moderate, more conservative. And in a 50-50 Senate, Craig, everybody's got to get at least a bit of what they want, or these things slow down, they get messier. I don't imagine anyone, or even any small group of Democratic senators, are ready to oppose a priority that is so important to this president, but it's clear that there are concerns which they raised at both, some of them at a White House meeting earlier this week and at this full conference Zoom lunch meeting with the president were heard here.
Really quickly here, timeline now. When is this bill likely to hit the president's desk for signature?
The goal is to get it to him by next weekend, by March 14th. They are still on track for that. As I mentioned, the CBO number here, we're waiting on that total score, the total cost of the Senate version of this bill before it can go to the floor. And then, Craig, we're looking at probably 2 very long days of debate and amendments before the Senate finishes. House has to vote on the Senate version. President gets a bill by late next week.
All right. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. Only on Capitol Hill is it exciting to wait on the CBO. Garrett Haight, thank you for that reporting. We also have some breaking news from the Middle East this morning. A rocket attack in western Iraq targeted an air base that hosts U.S. troops. And in just the last hour, the Pentagon said that an American civilian contractor suffered what's being described as a cardiac episode and died during that attack. Iraqi military sources said at least 10 rockets were fired at the base in the Anbar province. It was the first attack on a coalition base since a U.S. airstrike last week hit facilities in Syria linked to Iranian-backed militias. The attack also coming just 2 days before Pope Francis is set to make his first visit to Iraq. Meanwhile, back here this morning, New York's Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo facing new calls to resign. He is also on the verge of...
Thank you to my viewers. Good luck to all of us as we continue to be challenged by these hurdles and these obstacles that are in the way. in the way of true democracy, world democracy. Thanks again for listening. Good luck to all of us, and shalom.